Hello. Um, I was just finishing up a rant on my thoughts on the Calgary arena, the proposed new Flames arena. And lo and behold, I turn the page and I come across this. Council has proposed bylaw transit officers for traffic enforcement. Okay. There's a lot of things in this article that I want to touch on that'll lead into other things that will probably cause this to last a little bit. But anyhow, let's get into it. There are four councillors who are proposing this idea, one of which is Shane Keating. So I'm just going to come out and say that I am confused at the number of transit officers now. And I'm sure a few of you feel the same way. What I mean by that is, in the past, say 10 or some years ago, transit officers would never operate outside the bounds of, say, the platform of an LRT station, and very, very rarely outside of that. I could maybe count 10 vehicles for the amount of traffic officers that could go throughout the city and actually have a vehicle to drive. Usually, they just park their vans next to an LRT station if it was needed, if there was a dispute or a fight or some need for transit officers to be there. And, you know, sometimes I guess you could say they'd be on board a train to try to catch people who are going on the train without purchasing a ticket and so on. So when I come across an article like this where transit officers, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they mean the peace officers working for the LRT, this is a really odd idea to me. What I'm thinking is city transit having their own police force has grossly been inflated to that of a police force either, it seems to me, nearly the same size as the Calgary Police Service, but maybe slightly smaller. I see their vehicles more often than I see police patrol cars nowadays, and they're always driving somewhere around the city and driving here and driving there, some kind of pointless thing. And I confess I see some kind of a tone of menacing about them. They seem to be people who enjoy their power and have no qualms about flaunting their power in front of citizens. And I believe that power is sort of odd. I find it odd. Why do we feel the need to be over-policed on an LRT or any form of transit, since that's like a public service? Are there so many criminals in Calgary that you feel the need to over-police us with so many transit police and so on? And why do they have vehicles? Why do they need vehicles, like, to travel here and there? Like, that might be a stupid proposition, but I would argue that the former amount of peace officers, if you will, was already sufficient, even with this population, to take care of the LRT and other transit affairs. Now, here's where I can find proof that their power is starting to get out of control. They want to give transit officers the ability to police or take somewhat the role of police in the public setting. And quote here, a group of councillors want to investigate the feasibility using City Corps, bylaw, and transit officers to bolster police traffic enforcement. I would argue that we already have more than sufficient traffic enforcement in this city. An excessive amount, I might even say that. And they've been using this idea of a budget cut to use that as a pretense to try to give more power to these people. More power to these transit cops, whom, by the way, should not have the power they have now, because it's way inflated. It's too much. You put in so much money into these people, and they're nothing more than security guards. That's my thinking, or at least in the Calgary I grew up in, that's what they were. They were there to protect the public in the setting of LRT or buses or some kind of dispute, so anything to do directly with transit. Not in the public setting, and definitely not to police the public in general in the same context as the Calgary City Police. So I find this to be extremely disturbing. I don't understand why this is happening, and I have no doubt that something like this could be put into law, because I feel very much that this idea of, we're low on police, I don't buy it for a second. I believe the city of Calgary is very heavily policed, and I might be one of the few people that believe that. But nonetheless, I do believe that they have sufficient numbers to police the public and protect the public. I believe that. And I don't believe that the city of Calgary is so far so mired in crime that we require more police officers. I haven't interviewed the city police, and I don't try to claim that I'm an expert on the matter. And I find it very peculiar that they feel the need to police more. I feel it's over-policed. And I feel that this city transit corps, if you will, the city transit officers, this is wrong. This is not the right way to go about things. Surely there'll be restrictions and cuts to the police force. I'm not in favor of that at all. But I do believe that this scenario here, this thing was deliberately set up to give these people power. More power than what they need. And I am not happy with the current transit officer situation right now. I find them to be, generally speaking, I find them to be more and more and more involved in public affairs outside of the bounds of city transit affairs. And I don't like it. I'm not happy with that. This kind of thing, there needs to be a border around it, because if you give them too much power, then there's probably nothing separating them from real cops. And I don't understand that. Why should we have a second police? You know what I mean? It's not to me something that's needed, something that's warranted. It's extra. And I wish I could talk to more people about it, and I really hope that by uploading this video that somebody else speaks, because I'm finding it extremely disturbing that with the amount of police enforcement we have now, here's a picture of, I don't know why it's distorted, but a picture of some kind of officer doing photo radar, which, it's really nice that 660 News tries to give us a heads up on these people, because when they talk about predatory against the public and trying to make a cash cow out of ticketing people, I believe in that 100%. I believe it's predatory. I believe that the cops entrap people, generally speaking. The amount of money that they spent on their new undercover cars that they use for photo radar and photo enforcement and so on. I'm seeing their SUVs being upgraded nearly every year. And I'm for people obeying the law and obeying the speeds and, school zones and so on. But again, what I'm trying to say is, It's over-policed. Too much. They had, on the middle of a winter's day, actually it was dark even, and it was a heavy blizzard, they had the photo radar out. And everybody, I swear, because of the ice, they were doing like 40 kilometers an hour or less. Just because there was so much snow, you couldn't function with your vehicle normally. You couldn't have the proper handling if you didn't slow down. Like, there was no people speeding. It's common sense. They're trying to enforce and make tickets while the weather is just absolutely horrendous. And this is the thing that I wish I just, somebody else that observed this kind of thing and feel the same as I do, I wish I could find that person, because it's, surely people in Calgary feel that it is over policed, but they don't want to say anything because, to say it's over policed, well, that's not the right idea. We need more police here and more police there and make it safer. No, I don't think so. I think it's over policed. It's too much police. And this sector here that will add their powers, if you will, this is an extra redundancy. Why give them all this power? They're going to have the ability already to menace people, and I've seen them menacing people before. They're exploiting their power. They're overusing their power and trying to menace the public. I don't agree with what this proposal is saying, and I hope that there are others in the city that feel the same as me. So that's my 5 cents. In addition, that same month, City Council voted to lower the default speed limit on residential streets. I'm not for that either. I believe that if people are free to do things of their own accord, most people will act responsibly. You must trust a person to act responsibly. A good citizen would. I'm not saying that there aren't people out there that disobey the law each day. I've seen them all the time, but people should have the freedom to do it. Why do they keep restricting things? No parking, restrictions on parking. The parking authority has gone out of control. That's a fact for me, an empirical fact. You look at how City Council spends their money. Every year there's a new type of city transit bus, more advanced train cars, more city transit officers around, more ticketing, more no parking zones. For me, this issue is another nail in the coffin to the freedom of citizens in this city. If it's passed, it's another restriction on the freedoms that we all enjoy. And I feel very much that this city, the face of this city has changed under this council. I feel very strongly that the city is overly enforcing its rule, overly enforcing its supposed power, and it's really harming citizens more than it's doing good. I have a lot more to say on the Calgary Parking Authority, in fact, and I feel very strongly that these people, if any cuts are to be made in the budget, that the parking control, that should be the first one to go. I remember a time in this city it was so cheap to park. There was no such thing as the guidelines that guide it now. People could park with freedom, essentially. That's what I'm trying to say, is that you would park somewhere, and if you abuse that time, like say 8 hours or longer, maybe you'd be ticketed. But like, it used to be that there's a lot of free parking in the city of Calgary. You'd never be stuck for parking. And under Nenshi, we have the most expensive parking, higher than the city of, I think Vancouver or Toronto, if I recall correctly, there was a study that was done to find out what was the most expensive place to park in Canada, and I think Victoria was number 1, but I can't remember, and Calgary was 2 or something like that. Like, don't quote me on that, but what I'm trying to say is, 10 years ago or a little bit longer than that, Calgary, I would consider that to be a very open-minded, understanding, and easygoing city. The idea that you would put so much regulation on parking and basic things like parking downtown, or even trying to get to work without running into 1,000 construction zones. Like, this kind of idea of restricting, of no, you may not, in the city of Calgary, this idea, I think, is coming from council, and it's all of council is to be blamed, with the exception of Jeremy Farkas, whom, by my understanding, at least from what I've observed, is actually trying to help the city to try to return to a more free environment, if you want to say that, a more fair and just environment. I believe that this council has acted very poorly. I'm looking at so many articles and criticisms of the city, and they're far too few. I believe the budget cut again on that was proposed by the city has been a pretense for stuff like this to happen. Like the bylaw and transit police, which are already not a small faction. They're actually big. They're a lot more than what people admit, at least from what I've seen. And I believe that their power is growing recklessly, out of control. They need to return to a state in which they are essentially reduced to what they were before. Or I'd say a reduction of at least 40% of its employees would be a start. Because I'm not trying to take away jobs from people, but again, this kind of work is make work. It's an extra. It's something the city should not be paying into because it's extra. It's not needed. I look at the LRT statistics and so on, and I study how there's not a lot of criminal activity on the LRT. Let's be honest. If you look at it from the perspective just dispassionate observance, you'll find that the city of Calgary is a very peaceful city, generally speaking. There's more crime, but there's more population now and so on. And I mean, I'm just trying to understand how this can happen. Why is our freedoms being restricted so much? Why are we overly policed all the time? I'm looking at this and I'm saying the idea itself is not a free idea. It's a very restrictive idea. You see? Anybody who's lived in this city for 20 or summer years will tell you that traffic enforcement, even before 20 years ago, was very strong. Calgary is not, you could say it's like police country. That's what my father used to tell me. But in the last 10 years, I've seen a radical increase in the amount of enforcement. It's overly done. I remember when the Red Mile was going a couple years back, maybe a little bit longer. It might have been 5, but anyway. So essentially, everybody knows that the Red Mile was party town when the Calgary Flames were winning. And we made it close to the cup. After that, proposals were put in place and passed to make the amount of enforcement equal to that of the risk of citizens getting out of hand. And then after that, it became, way extra. I remember driving up 17th Avenue. People were not being... I want to say like they were not, from my observations, they were not being out of hand. Everything appeared to be in order. And yet there were at least 4 to 6 police cars per block. It was like a police army. It's I couldn't believe it. It seemed that there were more police than there were actually Calgary Flames fans. So all I'm saying is that the amount of control is getting out of hand. The amount of city-regulated control is out of hand. And something's got to be done. And somebody should say something, because this is not, I would call, a liberal society anymore. This is a very restrictive environment. This is an environment in which you have a lot of regulations, overly regulated, especially when it interferes into people's lives. In the setting of, say, like if you park at Sandy Beach on the side of a hill which has had free parking for years, you close the overflow so that people don't have a choice. It's a small parking lot for you to park there. And so people park on the side of the road. Then you send the city parking control to ticket everybody from basically the parking lot entrance to the top of the hill. That's not fair. People should not be a victim of predatory parking authority and control just because they're trying to have fun on a Sunday afternoon. That's unacceptable. I hope many of you feel the frustration that I do, and I hope that a few of you, though my points are their opinions, but I find it to be valid because I am simply observing what the city is doing. And I hope many of you observe the same. So thank you for your time, and have a good day. Bye-bye.